They told me I had 20 minutes, and I've been at this gig for 3 years. I've never given a 20-minute address. So whoever the first person is who has the nerve to get up and walk out, if I go over my 20-minute, not only will I revoke your license, right? It will also be my signal to shut up and then we can move on. So, please continue to enjoy lunch, and I really have, I hope to be, what I hope will be a brief address, and I hope to give you really kind of a lay of the land from my perspective, both nationally and up in Hartford in terms of some of the things that are going around that affect the business of insurance and a regulator's viewpoint of how things are taking shape. I hope to talk to you about 4 things today. Regulatory reform, mostly at a national level, something that I've been actively engaged in at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. Healthcare reform. I don't give a presentation like this these days unless we talk about healthcare reform in some way, shape, or manner. I'm going to be very brief about that, but there's things that are happening both in Washington and in Hartford that I'd like to share with you. Speaking of Hartford, I'd like to give you kind of my perspective on some of the things that challenge our great state and you know, what we need to do to kind of get hold of those issues. And then finally, I'll talk briefly about my office's legislative agenda and some of the bills that are circulating right now as the General Assembly is in session. I know Chairman Fontana was here yesterday. He may or may not have touched on some of those, but his view of some of those might be, dare I say, a little different than mine. So, quickly on regulatory reform, I had the, I guess, pleasure of testifying before Barney Frank's House Financial Services Committee in late October on the current bill that ultimately passed the House that's still circulating in the 111th Congress. As we sit or stand here today, the regulatory reform is still a sausage factory, if you will. It's still being formed. The House has passed their version of regulatory reform. Senate banking and all things financial services regulation go through Senate banking in Washington. Senate banking, Chairman Dodd, is scheduled to drop his bill perhaps as early as today, tomorrow, or Thursday is what we're being told. What's contained in that is somewhat still speculative. We know that things like Consumer Financial Protection Agency, CFPA, will likely be in it. Whether or not insurance is in it or out of it remains yet to be seen. We think it's going to be out. It was out and it was carved out of the House bill. So we don't think that there's a need for dual regulation of products, since my office already regulates all product form filings that come that are sold in Connecticut. We think it's unnecessary dual regulation, and you know, PIA has taken a similar position on that issue. But things like systemic risk regulation need to be dealt with. There again, our resolution authority, which is what we do, what I do as a receiver if I need to unwind an insurance institution, is a tried true measure. We know that when I have to intervene, unlike bankruptcy court, for all intents and purposes, we have efficient rundowns of insurance enterprises, and we have guarantee funds that sit behind virtually all forms of insurance that affect individual consumers. That system has worked very well for decades. I don't see a need for Washington to disrupt what's been working for a long, long time. We can talk about, you know, what the FDIC does and some of the other financial services sectors in terms of how they resolve troubled institutions, but I think insurance is just fine. Thank you very much. So hopefully what you hear in my theme is that, and this is, I think, the NAIC's position has been PIA's position, effectively insurance through the great tsunami, if you will, that was the economic calamity of the last 18 to 24 months, has fared just well. And we don't need to throw out the baby with the bathwater in terms of reshaping regulatory reform. That was the essence of my testimony before Chairman Frank. It was kind of funny, I was on a panel, Secretary Geithner preceded me, And then I was on with FDIC Chairman Sheila Bair. I was on with the current Chairman of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, Governor Tarullo, the acting Executive Director of the OTS was to my immediate right. I refer to him as the dead man walking, because in case you haven't been watching, the Office of Thrift Supervision effectively, and just about everybody's legislation, is being eliminated and or rolled into the OCC. So I was on a panel with all other federal regulators, and Chairman Frank was, quite frankly, very gratuitous in his comments about state regulation and how it's worked. When he introduced me to the other members of Congress, you know, he, again, was effectively tipping his cap to state regulators. So, and what's funny about that is, you know, I've been at this for 3 years. My early days when I would travel to Washington and talk to our elected officials, the NAIC didn't have a lot of respect. We didn't get a lot of traction for doing our job. You know, Rahm Emanuel's quote is saying, "A crisis is a terrible thing to waste," right? Well, the crisis that we've all just been through has proven the worthiness of state regulation. And we've gotten the attention of everyone in Congress. We appreciate the support of the PIA. We know that you've been our allies in the fight against threats of optional federal charter and centralizing more power in Washington at the risk of regulators who are doing their jobs. So I would tell you, if I've seen anything in the last 3 years, I've seen incredible attention and effectively acknowledgement from our elected officials around a recognition that we are doing a job and we have protected consumers. That's not to say the fight, if you will, that there aren't advocates out there who will continue to promote the notion of an optional federal charter. That threat is omnipresent. It will always be there, largely because, dare I say, the well-funded insurance industry you know, would prefer to have a single regulator as opposed to having to deal with 50 of me. Can you imagine dealing with 50 of me? That's, you know, and there's some good and valid reasons why we at the NAIC need to get better and harmonize and get more uniform about how we regulate. We get all that, and we're working on a number of modernization initiatives. But, you know, to, again, throw the baby out with the bathwater in favor of a single regulator that displays a functioning regulatory regime, I think is relatively foolhardy. So that's my shtick on regulatory reform. I'd like to talk a little bit about healthcare, and, you know, I testified, as Gardner knows, and some others, for any of you who actually watch CTN. By the way, if you watch, I don't watch CTN anymore, and I'm a public official. If you watch CTN, you really need to get a life, okay? But I was up at the Capitol last week testifying on a bill which impacts the authority of my agency around regulating individual health insurance. And you may have seen some of my quotes in a number of the daily newspapers and some of the trade journals around moving the rate authority of my office from what are widely recognized terms in the actuarial community of excessive, inadequate, and unfairly discriminatory to a rating regime which looks at rates on whether or not they are fair and reasonable and have a reasonable rate of return, which, by the way, aren't defined in the proposed statute. So I'm very concerned about that because it, frankly, weakens the regulatory authority of my office. More importantly, it sets up a playing field that I think would be incredibly difficult to regulate. So, and by the way, Chairman Fontana, who I know was here yesterday, supports the bill. I oppose it. So, as much as I have incredible respect for the chairman and the committee, that's an initiative and a slippery slope that I, as a regulator, and I would recommend that the governor, if it ever got that far, would set Connecticut up on a collision course with the producers of product who come into our market with incredible uncertainty, would drive down competition in my judgment, and we'd probably have less than the 8 underwriters that we have today in the